Big Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What's going on? Matt O'Leary alongside Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how's it going, my friend?
It's not going well, as you know, viewers of this show know. I was big on the Bill Belichick back to New York train, and unfortunately, it's Chapel Bill Belichick going to play or going to coach UNC instead and build out a football program there. I got to say, just as a quick reaction to that, since I think it ties into the narrative that I've been building on the show for several weeks, there was a report today that said Belichick gave some thought to the Giants' job, but ultimately didn't want to go through a rebuild, which I get and I understand. He's in his 70s. But I will say, like, all of the details that we learned about Belichick going to UNC, the fact that he wrote the program, the football program Bible, and had a clear plan on how to restructure an organization, that was exactly what I was hoping for Bill Belichick to the Giants. Like, every kind of point that I made in favor of hiring Belichick was proven through his process of being hired at UNC. So unfortunately, that's not the direction the Giants are going to go, but they could still be going into a new direction, which is what I'm excited to talk about in the Giants portion of today's episode.
Yeah, he had like a 400-page manifesto written for UNC.
That's exactly what the Giants needed, man.
Yeah, you're right. Like the Giants clearly, I think, need to start, trying to build some sort of a culture, which they haven't been able to do. And that's honestly a pretty good segue into how we wanted to start the show with, this article that came out that, is maybe hinting on some regime changes.
Yeah, a new article that came out from ESPN. I'll go ahead and pull it up and we can take a look at the excerpt. And some interesting stuff that kind of indicated that maybe the Giants regime is not safe. So let's see. I think you got to add it in. There we go. All right, so from Dan Graziano of ESPN, I got to say his hit rate on Giants information is really high. Every time Graziano says something, I listen. But basically saying with the Giants, he knows that ownership is sick of changing coaches every 2 or 3 years, doesn't want to move on from Brian Daboll, but the team is not competitive, and there's been enough negativity there the past couple of years that it's possible they could decide they want a new administration to make the call on the next QB and the future direction of the franchise, which is what Jeremy Fowler also said that he's hearing. Comes down to John Mara's patience level, but people that he's spoken to with the team believe Mara wants to stick to the plan, but outsiders are wondering how difficult that'll be if it's week 17 and MetLife Stadium is half full with the Giants stuck on 2 wins. So we'll see. Jeremy Fowler kind of indicating it's going to come down to the way that they play down the final 4 games of the season. If there's no signs of life, then it could end up becoming a clean house situation.
Yeah, and based on it's a very interesting article and point of view. And as you pointed out, he's been pretty spot on with his Giants information. And I would find it very hard to believe that at some point over the remaining 4 games that the Giants have, that, magically the light switch is going to go on and then they're going to start looking competitive. Unfortunately, it looks and feels like a team that is done. And that would end the Giants season on what, an 11-game losing streak or 12-game losing streak if they lose out the rest of the way and finish with just 2 wins on their season. We've said it on the show before. Like, I don't know how you can survive that as a regime.
I don't know how you can survive it either. Not to mention the fact that if the Giants do lose out, they're going to be 0-9 at home. Not a single win at home during the 100th season of the franchise. That's as embarrassing as it gets and as infuriating for John Mara as possible, I think. So I really don't see a way where this regime survives. And, like Fowler says in his excerpt of this article, it's a test of the on-field product over the next few weeks. And then, of course, you have to think about the draft. When you see the way that this roster devolved over the last 3 years, 2022 it was one thing, 2023 it was worse, 2024 way worse than that. The way that this roster has devolved, do you really want to let this regime take a swing with the number 1 potential overall pick on a quarterback? I'm not so sure. In fact, I'm sure that I don't want to see that happen. And I'm happy to hear from this report that John Mara is having second thoughts on that plan.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, right? And I get it. Unfortunately for Joe Shane and Brian Dable, it looks like there's a chance that they go down without ever getting a chance to draft their guy. But if you do draft a quarterback, doesn't that also extend the window for both of Shane and Dable and maybe Dable at that point? Like it's very hard to see the Giant if they were to keep everyone, if they were to draft somebody first or second overall, and then after 1 year, pull the plug and go, all right, we got to find a new GM and a new coach now after year one of our quarterback.
Yeah, and that's like my biggest fear is right now you have a GM who's painted himself into a corner. He has to draft a quarterback and he has to improve this roster to the point where they win at least 7 or 8 games next season. So what's that going to result in? A very aggressive and desperate offseason approach. We're probably going to see Joe Shane take the quarterback at number one, buy into the quarterback. Even if he doesn't think the quarterback is a potential Pro Bowl level player, he's got to take it anyway and just hope for the best. Then also go into free agency, spend a boatload of money just to earn wins in the short term. There's going to be a very short-sighted approach here if Joe Shane is still the general manager. Meanwhile, if you were to reboot, clean house, and bring in a new GM, they can take a long-term approach. Take the quarterback when it's the right time to, whether they think that's now or in the future. Sign free agents who have more of a long-term plan of being here. They don't have to buy wins in 2025. But if you stick with this regime, they're going to be desperate and they're going to be doing everything they can to win now rather than later. And this roster, frankly, is not positioned to win now. They need a rebuild to try and win in the future.
Yeah, they need a lot of help. Obviously, quarterback's a really big need for the Giants, and you could clearly make a case for them taking a quarterback. I know you've talked about the idea of trading down, getting more picks, and building out the roster and waiting on the quarterback, but that's not an option for Joe Shane and Brian Dable. For a new regime that's coming in here, that's going to get a longer window of opportunity. That's a different avenue that you could explore. So again, like I don't think it makes any sense at all for you to bring back either of those two guys. So the fact that this was written about today and we had this report come out, like just reading the tea leaves, like it makes sense here.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. This feels like I feel like I've read an article exactly like this in the past, whether that was in 2021, right before Dave Gettleman ended up departing at the end of the season, or if it was in 2017, a couple weeks before they let go of Jerry Reese. This is that article. This is like the precursor to a firing. This is what we usually see. Some sort of big insider, whether it be a Jeremy Fowler, Dan Graziano of ESPN, or a Mike Garafolo of NFL Network. One of them usually releases an article like this that doesn't make any guarantees, but at least indicates that there are conversations happening at the top of the organization that a change could be made, and then eventually a change is made. And like we both agree, the last 4 weeks of the season, this team needs to win games in order for jobs to be kept. There's no winnable games really on the schedule for this Giants team. This is the worst roster in football, and they keep getting worse and worse every week because of all the injuries that keep piling up. So this is just an embarrassing season, again, in the 100th season of the franchise. I don't see how you can move into this offseason and keep this regime intact. The only argument, and I'll play devil's advocate here for keeping this regime intact, who would replace him? Bill Belichick is off the board. He would have made a lot of sense to just revamp the entire organization. And if you look at some head coaching candidates, sure, there are some strong ones out there. Mike Vrabel is available. Ben Johnson potentially could be persuaded to come here. But do those guys really want to come coach the New York Giants? And what general manager wants to take on this roster? Yeah, the potential number one overall pick is attractive, but the roster in general is a complete gut job. So I think the Giants would have a pretty hard time attracting high-level candidates to their positions this offseason.
I I want to ask you a question, and I'm genuinely curious of your response. And I won't I don't think you're going to let your bias come into this one. But what which job do you think would be more appealing to a GM and or head coach candidate? Is it the Jets or the Giants?
I personally would say that it's the Jets because of the strength of the roster being way better than the Giants. Now, I think from a organizational level, both of these teams are a mess.
Mhm.
However, ownership for the Giants is really willing to spend and doesn't get in the way of moves. So if you want freedom and autonomy, you probably prefer to be with the New York Giants because I think the general manager has a little bit more autonomy there. But if you want a strong roster with assets to build around and to sell off, the Jets. I mean, even if you're looking at this roster and saying, okay, they have some competitive pieces, you can also be looking at it from a standpoint of we have some very tradable pieces. We can collect some assets and build for the future. The Giants simply do not have that. They have 2 stars, really, that are touchable, maybe. But Andrew Thomas, I guess, would be a veteran that would have some interest around the league, and Dexter Lawrence. Outside of that, they don't have any tradable players, really. Obviously, they have Malik Neighbors, but you're not going to trade him. If you look at the Jets, I mean, technically Garrett Wilson could be on the block. I guess you could look at Quinn Williams. Like, you have star level players that you could trade if you wanted to. So I think that would give more fuel to the fire for a GM looking at the Jets job over the Giants job. But then again, would Woody Johnson allow the Jets GM to make those moves would be a whole nother question.
Yeah, I think it's the point that I was trying to make, and I think you kind of just said it perfectly, is I think it's closer than some people realize. I think people are going to look and be like, oh, well, the Giants are going to have a number 1 pick and like kind of clean slate, find your quarterback and go from there. I agree. From the owner perspective, Giants, without a question of a doubt, is a better ownership situation. But with the Jets job, you have some pieces in place that you could build around and some things that, are already figured out for you. It looks like your left tackle's figured out in Olu Fashanu. He's played really well. You have a number 1 wide receiver in Garrett Wilson. You could potentially have a really good 1B with Devontae Adams too, if you want to restructure him. You have Breece Hall on the defense, Quinnen and Sauce and Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson coming back. Like, there's things to like about the roster, but then there's always that dark cloud hanging over your head of Woody Johnson. So I wasn't sure. I think you can make a case for either side, but I think it's closer maybe than we realize here.
Yeah, I think you can make a case for either side, and the number 1 pick potentially for the Giants is super attractive for any GM and coach. But the Giants have also been a mess for a decade now, and they've churned out GMs and head coaches every 2-3 years. So that also makes it a less attractive job, at least for the Jets. Woody Johnson stayed patient with Joe Douglas, that's for sure. He had plenty of time to turn things around before he got fired. Well, could you say the same about the New York Giants organization? Will you have that time afforded to you that Woody Johnson afforded to Joe Douglas? Not necessarily. So, and again, the strength of the roster, the quality of the roster, obviously the Jets roster isn't good enough. They would be more competitive if it were, but they do have more pieces than the Giants do. That's for sure. And so if you want to inherit a roster with tradable assets and with players to build around, you lean towards the Jets. Again, like we both agree, it's just going to come down to ownership control.
Couple questions or comments that I wanted to pull up here as well. Namar asks, am I mad? I am mad, excuse me. John Mara didn't get Bill Belichick. Is it Mara didn't get Belichick, or is it Belichick wanted to get into college football? Like, what's your stance on the Belichick side?
I think it's both. I think that, John Mara probably could have made the phone call to Belichick and begged, and I think Belichick was definitely persuadable. I think he could have been persuaded. I reading the report this morning, I didn't have that one pulled up, but paraphrasing, it said he liked the idea of going back to the Giants, but knowing that it needed to be a rebuild and knowing how aggressive the New York media is, he didn't want to have to deal with that and would rather build a program from scratch in college instead. But I think there was some interest, and he could have been persuaded by Mara. But ultimately, I don't think Belichick wanted to return to the NFL. I think he was pissed off at how he didn't get a job last year, and I think he just preferred to go to the collegiate level overall.
Justin's hanging with us too. Says, "What's up, Matt and Anthony? I have a question for you. I know that you were high on Bill Belichick becoming our next head coach, but he signed with UNC. So who's your next candidate?"
I don't know, honestly. It's really tough because I'm not in love with really any of the top candidates in this cycle. I think last year's cycle was a really strong one. This one is a little bit hit or miss for me. Obviously, Vrabel stands out as an experienced CEO type head coach, and that's probably what the Giants need, and they probably should prioritize him. But then there's guys like, Ben Johnson would be awesome. I don't think Ben Johnson's going to want to come here. I think he's going to want to stay with Detroit first and foremost. But the Giants' job is probably not attractive to him. You'd have to revamp that entire offense. I guess Aaron Glenn, defensive coordinator of the Lions, makes a lot of sense just because he has the players coach mentality and ability to restructure the team. That might make sense. But just overall, there's not a ton out there that gets you overly excited about the head coaching candidates this offseason, in my opinion. So I'm not really sure which direction I want to go yet.
Yeah. I think that's fair. For me on my side, I've talked a lot about Mike Vrabel being my favorite option. I wonder if he would be a candidate that the Giants would consider.
Yeah, I wonder that too. I will throw out one more name just because
Sure.
I love my Chargers defensive coordinator Jesse Minter. I think that
Yep.
he's an up and coming star. He's not got that much experience. This is his first season coaching in the NFL. Maybe he can make a quick jump up to the head coaching job just because he is so talented and so smart from the defensive side of the ball.
Ian sent in a super chat. Appreciate the support. Ian says, I want Marcus Freeman, the head coach from Notre Dame. Thoughts, if any? Like his leadership, and he's a young guy, so it's not just temporary leadership, it's sustainable. What's your thoughts on picking from the college route?
I think it's an interesting idea and concept, but I do think oftentimes that looks very interesting in theory, and sometimes in execution it doesn't work well just because running a college program is vastly different from running an NFL program. Obviously, that's becoming a big talking point now with Belichick. Maybe NFL coaches want to get back into the collegiate level, but collegiate level going to the NFL, I think it's just so different the way that the offense and defenses are ran schematically, and owning leadership control in a locker room with teenagers and early 20-year-olds, that's one thing. Having 30 and 40-year-olds in your locker room is a completely different thing. So I don't think I know enough about Marcus Freeman to comment completely my thoughts on him, but the concept of a collegiate coach elevating to the head coaching level in the NFL does give me pause, and I'm not exactly sure that's what the Giants need right now.
Yeah, it's for Freeman, really good defensive mind. He was the 20 what year? Hang on, I just had it. I'm sorry, I lost it. The 2020 defensive coordinator of the year. I believe he was Notre Dame's defensive coordinator that year, or it could have been Cincinnati. It was Cincinnati, and then he's been with Notre Dame since 2021. I like the idea in theory, but in practice, I don't know if it's something that would work out. I'm just thinking of some recent examples of that, like Matt Rule, Nick Saban, like guys who have made the jump and unfortunately it hasn't necessarily worked out. And then they end up going back to the college game and find that success. I was going to say Pete Carroll, but he was a head coach in the NFL at one point, then went to college and then came back. So that one's a little bit different.
Yeah, Pete Carroll is quite honestly a name that I would consider for the Giants, though, just because he has experience, like championships experience. I mean, I don't know, though. That's not one that would get me overly excited either, because, I mean, I guess he shares some of those similar qualities to what Belichick would with being able to restructure an organization, but I don't think to the extent Belichick could. And I don't know if he would ever even want to leave Seattle. I mean, I know he's up there in the front office now. He's not on the sidelines anymore. And I don't know if Carroll wants to be on the sidelines anymore. So I don't know. I think if you're the Giants and you want somebody experienced and you want a head coach who's established as a winner, it's very hard to find those guys right now. And unfortunately, like we see a few other comments, Joe Brady and Bobby Slowick, like those are interesting names on the offensive side of the ball, really smart offensive names, but could they realistically step in and command the level of respect that an experienced winning head coach could? I'm not so sure. And I just don't know if there's anybody out there that's going to fill that need for the Giants. It's very tough to find established head coaches. All of these guys are kind of similar to what we just went through with Brian Dable, where you would need to give them a lot of time to figure it out. And I don't know if the Giants have that time.
How do you feel about Brian Flores? Obviously defensive coordinator right now in Minnesota, was the Dolphins head coach for 3 seasons. Hasn't been a head coach since 2021, I believe was his last year there. Any feel for him? Because that kind of at least hits your established coach, level.
Yeah, I mean, I would love Brian Flores, but Brian Flores would never come to the Giants.
Oh
He
shit!
filed a
Yeah,
class
that's right.
action lawsuit against them several years ago.
Yeah, yeah, that's a key factor that I forgot about that.
Yeah,
Whoops,
I
my
mean,
bad.
he accused the entire organization of racial discrimination. So I don't think he's interested in coaching the Giants. But I mean, that's a fumble and a half. I think you could argue that if the Giants hired Flores a couple of years ago, maybe they'd be in a better spot right now. But I don't know. at the end of the day, I don't think Brian Dable is a terrible coach. I think he's lost the locker room, and for that reason, you're going to have to move on. But I really just think he's been handed a terrible roster with a lot of draft misses and over reliance on those draft misses on a Sunday standpoint. So I don't know. I think this thing is just a mess, and I think we could play revisionist history. Maybe Flores would have been the better pick. Maybe he wouldn't have. I really think that the way the roster has been managed has been the downfall of the Giants more so than the mismanaged coaching of Brian Dable, considering he was coach of the year in 2022. But overall, I wish I had more answers for an attack plan for this offseason, but it's really hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel for me.
Yeah, been there. I get that. I do like Joe Brady a lot as a play caller. I think I like him more than Bobby Slowick. It would be a relatively quick rise for Joe Brady, though. He was a coordinator for a couple years in Carolina with Matt Rule, then goes back to college, comes back to the Bills, and took over last year. And the offense has been pretty much humming ever since he took over. So that would also that would feel like a similar route with what they just did, though, right? Picking the offensive coordinator for Josh Allen.
Right. Too similar to me, I think. And while he is a really great candidate and he's an exciting coach, actually, we talked about him several years ago in Fireside Giants, like as an offensive coordinator candidate. We thought he would have been really exciting if he was brought in with Brian Dable. But at this point, feels too derivative of what we've already seen. And I think banking on that to work this time around when it didn't work the last time around wouldn't make a ton of sense. One name that I do want to throw out there that I think could be intriguing, not necessarily my top choice, I don't think it would be, but I could see there being some level of interest in Cliff Kingsbury. He's done wonders with Jaden Daniels this year, and with the Giants in position to draft a quarterback, they might want to go with a head coach who has previous experience. Cliff Kingsbury was a head coach for a time with the Cardinals. It wasn't necessarily the most successful time, but he was a head coach there, and he is a quarterback whisperer. So maybe that's the route that they would like to go. I could see that becoming a name that would add some intrigue to the Giants. Not a top name, but I do think that's a dark horse one to keep an eye on.
I don't hate it. I really don't. Now, his Cardinals stint wasn't the most successful ever, but you look at what he was able to do with Kyler Murray and help him along. Then you see what he's doing now with Jaden Daniels, and they've cooled off a little bit, Washington, but still an impressive rookie campaign from Jaden Daniels. If the Giants are drafting a quarterback, I don't think it's a bad idea to go with the Cliff Kingsbury route. So I like it. Again, I don't know if it's my top number one option, but I don't think it's a horrible one.
It's one I would have some interest in. I'd have I think the pros and the cons would equally be long lists. But again, it's one that I would consider. And then I'll throw out one last one. Vance Joseph, defensive coordinator of the Broncos, also has some former head coaching experience. His defense is elite. I think that the Giants defense, missing talent at some key spots, but has some talent at other key spots. He could probably get the most out of that. But again, that would really just be dependent on who he hires as his offensive coordinator. That would get me to buy in on that. But I will say, Vance Joseph, again, somebody who's really well respected around the league, a good leader, could immediately transform the Giants defense into a top unit overnight. Plus, Davis Webb, former Giants quarterback, is the quarterback's coach over in Denver. I wonder if you would be able to bring him along as an offensive coordinator. He's going to be a top OC candidate this offseason. Perhaps you get Vance Joseph, bring Davis Webb back into the building. Maybe that could be something intriguing for the Giants.
I like that. I like that a lot. Any other thoughts on the Giants side before we flip over and talk about the Jets Tank Bowl coming up this week?
I will say the more that we've discussed this, as badly as I want to clean house reboot, it's really dependent on who is actually interested in this job, because I don't think the candidates for these jobs are that strong this offseason. So I guess perhaps you could make an argument to tough it out one more year. I think it would be a mistake to do that. But you do have to feel confident that you're getting the right guys in if you're sending these guys out. And my level of confidence is not super high that there are very attractive candidates out there. And in fact, I think that you might have to look and see if there's any surprise firings at the end of the year before you can actually make the decision. I think the Giants have to wait to make their firings if they're going to make them. Because let's say a Mike McCarthy gets fired. that could be somebody that John Mara would be interested in. If Kyle Shanahan shockingly gets fired, obviously you do everything you can to bring him in. So I think the Giants have to wait and see before they make their decision. And I've said that all season long as well. I think that a firing needs to happen, but you might just have to wait first and see if there's any strong candidates out there.
I'm really hoping that I don't think they will, but I'm hoping the Browns do something stupid and shake Kevin Stefanski free, because he would rank very, very high up on my list of candidates for the Jets.
And the Giants for sure.
Love that. All right, let's get to it. The Tank Bowl. The New York Jets head down to Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. Both teams sit at 3-10. But if you look at good old Tankathon, friend of the show, hang on, pulling it up now. The Jaguars have the 5th pick currently, the Jets sitting at pick number 7. So clearly some major draft implications in play. Actually, with Jacksonville's win over Tennessee this past week, they bumped the Jets down from the 6th spot to the 7th spot. So the Jets lost, but still lost ground in the race for the top pick. Hard to see whoever wins this game getting back up as high as the top, I don't know, 5.
Yeah, it's a major implication game, like you mentioned, with the strength of schedule. There's a lot to keep an eye on there. But I will say, from the Giants' standpoint, I'm really rooting for Jacksonville to win this one as well, because I think that they have been in top contention for that top pick all year long, and I want them to get far away. But at the same time, I really don't want to see the Jets leapfrog us somehow either. So I don't think I have much to worry about, because I really don't imagine the Giants are going to win another game this season. But could you imagine if the Jets ended up somehow overtaking the Giants in draft positioning? That would be wild.
It would be wild. They'd need a couple things to break right, clearly, but they still are mathematically alive for the number 1 pick. The Jets, I think, would absolutely have to lose out, go 3-14, and they'd have to get some luck with Vegas and the Giants. I just, looking at the Giants schedule, I don't see one where I think they're going to have much of a chance with how they've been playing.
Yeah, like I said, I can't see the Giants win another game this year. But if they do sneak out one win, let's say they beat the Colts in week 17, I think it is. Well, then, and if the Raiders win a game down the stretch as well, which, I mean, they have a winnable game on Monday night versus the Falcons. Let's say those two things happen. Well, then the Jets, if they lose, when they would be picking, what is that, 5th, I guess, based on strength of schedule, with room to maybe even move up, though. No, they would be in the top 3, I think. So I don't know. I'm not good at math, but they'd be moving up real high.
Exactly. It's tough because you got to factor in like who all the teams in front of them are playing and what the strength of schedule would be, and this and that. But I think I'm not in a spot where I feel myself actively rooting for a win or a loss. I'm kind of in this phase where I'm like, all right, I'm going to go into it with whatever happens, and I'll spin it as a positive with whatever the result is. If they win, all right, they won a game. They probably weren't going to lose out anyway. This young core has gone through a lot of losing. I don't know how much of this is good for them. And then if they lose, I'll be the first one to go, all right, well, it's going to have help with their draft pick. I know it's not the deepest necessarily of draft classes, but there are some good players at the top of the board that I do like a lot for this team.
Yeah, I think so too. But I think for the Jets, if you're going to root for losses, it's because you feel dead set on one of these quarterbacks. You're not there for Cam Ward or Shedeur.
I don't think so. I know I did the mock with Shedeur this past week, but I don't think I would, in a perfect world, I don't think I would go that route. If they get up to 3 and you want to take Travis Hunter, that'd be interesting. That'd be a fun weapon to have for this new regime. The guy that I really like that I think will be in play for them, even at like a 6 or a 7, is Mason Graham from Michigan. We talked a lot about him on Monday's episode of the show. I think filling out your defensive line and making that a strength again, putting him next to Quinnen Williams and getting Jermaine Johnson back to pair with Will McDonald, I think you can make that line dominant again. And they're so close on the offensive line. They have 4 of their 5 pieces set for next year. They're all young, good, solid players. I think they need to get better on the defensive side of the ball, on the line specifically.
Can't go wrong with a trenches pick. That's how I feel. I mean, unless you're the Giants and you miss on every offensive lineman you take in the top 10, seemingly, other than Andrew Thomas. But I think defensive linemen are pretty stable. If you draft them high, they usually have success. And I could see that being a really exciting pick for the Jets. But I wonder if there's anything that you think in these final games of the season, win or lose, what could be highlighted as an obvious glaring weakness that needs to be addressed with a top draft pick potentially?
There's a lot that you could really make the case for, I think. Defensive line, I'll go broad and say line, because Abdul Carter, the edge rusher, I think is also in play. So I would say interior defensive line, edge, quarterback, you can make the case for also, obviously. Wide receiver would be a lot of fun, especially if they're moving on from Devontae Adams and freeing up the money. You would then have to find a number 2 to pair with Garrett Wilson, so maybe a wide receiver. I don't think offensive line is in play for the Jets after they went O-line last year. I know, it's still TBD who their right tackle is going to be. Do you bring back Morgan Moses? Do you find someone else? What's the play there? But if I would have to guess right now, those would be the most likely. And we did talk about the Michigan corner also as a potential option, Will Johnson, who declared as well. Not a surprise.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I do have a question about the quarterback position. Obviously, Aaron Rodgers played a lot better this past weekend, but do you think there's any chance they turn to Tyrod Taylor between now and the end of the regular season? And do you think that hurts or helps their chances of winning games down the stretch and potentially messing up their draft pick?
Unless Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, I don't think they're going to do that. Just because there's a few things that Rodgers is still playing for. He's playing for, I think he's right a few passes away from 500 career passing touchdowns. I think he wants to play the full 17-game season after being hurt last year and missing the entire year. If they were to go to Tyrod Taylor, I think it hurts their draft stock, or their chances of landing a draft pick. I think Rodgers and Tyrod could put up similar kind of production, but something that Tyrod offers that Rodgers really doesn't right now is taking shots down the field. Rodgers finally connected on one with Garrett Wilson for a big play, which was nice. But other than that, it's very short to intermediate passing right now in the offense, and they are very pass happy offense. And I think they'd be a little bit more balanced with Tyrod.
Yeah, I could see that being the case. I don't think they will turn to Tyrod. I would like to see them turn to Tyrod just because I like Tyrod and I want to see him succeed. But I don't know. What's the latest update on Rodgers and his future with the Jets? Is he certainly on his way out? Is there any chance he comes back? What's the update?
This is like a split, just about 50-50 for Jet fans if they want him back or they want him gone. It leans towards the Jets want a fresh start at GM, head coach, and quarterback. The biggest problem to me isn't necessarily the quarterback play. It hasn't been to the level where I think it needs to be. I think the dead money plays a big factor with $49 million this year. And then the potential of, if you keep him, then you have I believe it's $64 million in 2026 in dead money that they would have to eat. So part of me just kind of wants to rip the Band-Aid off and just kind of get it over with and roll with a Tyrod, maybe a mid-round quarterback swing this year, and Jordan Travis as the quarterback room.
You know what? Speaking of Jordan Travis, I should get an update soon on where he's at with his recovery, because one of his old teammates is joining my flag football team. So I'm going to ask him about it. So I'll hopefully have an update on the show next week.
Oh, that's fantastic news, because it has been like nobody knows where he was finally asked about, I think a week or two ago. And it was like, yeah, he wasn't progressing as quickly as we would have liked to. So he's not coming off. I think he's on the NFI list for this year. So that's basically all we know. So if you can get any sort of insider info, would be huge for the program.
Yeah, I'll try my best. This guy played high school ball with him. I think they're still friends. So I'll ask, and I'll hopefully have some insider news for the show next week.
I love it. I did get a kick out of your highlight tape that you put out on Twitter of
Pretty
your
good,
flash.
right? Looks
Yeah,
pretty good.
you slinging the rock around, man.
Won a championship.
Maybe
Pretty
you should
nice.
coach. You're the culture builder. You can build the culture for the Giants. Show them how it's done.
Man, with the quarterback problems they have, Drew Lock is out this week. Now they're going back to Tommy DeVito. Put me in. Let me compete on that practice squad. See if I can get the job. Come on now.
You're a better option than Tim Boyle. I can tell you that.
I think you can make that argument.
Does Tim Boyle play for the Giants at some point this year? I feel like we're getting close.
Well, he'll be second string on Sunday, so all it takes is one bad shot to Tommy DeVito's chest, and we've got Tim Boyle in there. So I think there's a good chance.
I can't believe that this guy is still kicking around the league. I don't know.
And I'm not.
Pictures of. Yeah, and you're
No, I'm
not.
not
More
kicking.
specifically, you're not. But Tim Boyle, he was horrible in college too. Have you ever looked up Tim Boyle's college stats?
No, I haven't.
Okay. This is how we're going to end the show today on a nice light mood. But Tim Boyle college stats. Pull this up for you. Okay. Ready? This is someone who has started multiple games in the NFL, gets a job every summer to be on a practice squad, the whole thing. 3 years at Connecticut. 1 touchdown to 13 picks, 48.4 completion percentage.
How the fuck is this guy in the NFL?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And been on multiple teams. You know, the Dolphins, the Packers, the Jets. I think he was in Houston in the preseason. The Giants now.
What dirt does he have on Commissioner Goodell?
That's what I'm saying. He's a 48.4 completion percentage, 1 touchdown, 13 picks over 3 years at Connecticut.
Wow. Yeah, I've never seen anything like that. How that guy made it to the NFL and has had multiple jobs. I guess it's behind the scenes culture builder, sure, whatever. I can bring some good leadership and culture to the locker room. Sign me, New York Giants. We'll get Tony Cutlets now.
Tony Cutlets. Perfect. I love it. So yeah, big things for the Jets this week with their game against the Jacksonville Jaguars for draft positioning. No one really cares at this point about the wins or the losses. I think the Jets win this week, though. I really do. I think they beat Jacksonville. Any thoughts there?
I think they'll probably win, but I don't know. The Jags, they've got something to them. Doug Peterson's fighting for his job. They're going to try their hardest to win that game. They're not necessarily in the tank bowl. I think Peterson really needs these wins and wants them. So there's a chance for the Jags, but Jets looked pretty strong last week against the Dolphins despite the loss. I think they're going to come out with a win over Jacksonville.
Do the Giants cover? I'm not going to ask, are they going to win? Are they going to cover the number?
What's the spread? Is it 16?
I've seen it as high as 16.
Yeah, probably, because their defense looked pretty good last week. I could be wrong. Absolutely could be wrong. I could see them losing by 40 points, but I don't know. They haven't been giving up a ridiculous amount of points this season. Like, teams aren't just blowing them out. It's the offense that just can't score. And usually there's not a lot of quick drives for the opposing offenses. So I could see a world where they lose by 10 points. It's never close. They make it 10 points in garbage time, but I could see them, covering the spread.
I didn't love the spread. I reluctantly took the Ravens laying the big number, coming off a bye, coming off a loss. I thought they'd be motivated. It is a road game for them. I feel like this is going to scream backdoor cover for the Giants, and I'm going to be upset on Sunday.
Yeah, I just think the Giants' defense isn't that bad, so that's where I'm at. The offense is that bad, but at the same time, they're desperate to get Malik Neighbors the football right now because he's upset with the way things are going. So I don't know. Maybe he does get in the end zone. Maybe I think they'll be a little bit more competitive than people realize, but they're still going to get, it's not going to be competitive in any sense of the word. But yeah, I don't know.
Right. We'll see.
I don't want to watch it. I don't want to watch that game at all, if you couldn't tell.
No, I don't blame you. But you get to see Lamar. That'd be fun.
I do love Lamar Jackson. I've even got a Lamar Jackson jersey. I'm a big fan of Lamar Jackson, but I don't know. Who cares? The Giants are so bad. It's just.
I'm sorry. I feel you. Been there so many times. It's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. All right. I think that's about going to wrap it for us on this episode. Make sure to subscribe to Anthony's channel, Fireside Giants, for his coverage on the Giants. Me, you can find me, Matt O'Leary, NY. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we'll catch you next time.